Beneath the quiet plains of central China, in a land once divided by war and bound by empire, there lies a secret that slept for over 2,000 years. The wind moves gently across the fields of Shaanxi province. Grain sways like waves beneath the morning sun. Farmers walk their paths as their ancestors did, unaware that just a few meters below their feet, an entire army stands at attention, silent, unblinking, eternal. Each soldier waits in the dark. Each face is frozen in a moment that outlasted dynasties, revolutions, and the birth of the modern world. Together, they guard the tomb of the man who called himself the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang. He was a ruler who sought to conquer not only the known world, but death itself. And in doing so, he left behind one of the most breathtaking wonders ever created by human hands. A vast underground army of clay, fashioned in his image of order and eternity. For centuries, no one knew they were there. The earth kept its secret well. Dynasties rose and fell. Cities were built and burned, and still the warriors waited in their underground silence. Until one spring morning in 1974, when a group of farmers digging a well struck something hard, something ancient. A clay face emerged from the dust, its features calm, lifelike, watching them as if it had been waiting for this very moment. That discovery would awaken the past and reveal a story of power, art, belief, and the timeless human desire to be remembered. But before we reach that moment of discovery, we must travel back to a time long before the empire, when China was not one land, but 7. We must return to the age of chaos, of endless war and ambition, when a young boy from the western mountains dreamed of uniting the world under his rule. His name was Ying Zheng. He would grow to become the first emperor, and long before his death, he began to build the kingdom of eternity that would one day lie buried beneath these quiet hills. Tonight, as you listen, let the noise of the present fade away. Close your eyes. Imagine the faint sound of a distant drum, echoing through time, a heartbeat from 2,000 years ago. Imagine torches flickering in tunnels deep beneath the earth, the glow of molten bronze, the scent of wet clay, thousands of workers, craftsmen, soldiers, prisoners, all bound by one purpose: to build a world that would never end. The story of the Terracotta Army is more than a tale of art and archaeology. It is a mirror held up to the human soul, a reflection of our fear of death, our hunger for immortality, and our unending faith in the power of creation. Each warrior, each brick, each handful of soil in that vast tomb was shaped by human hands, hands that trembled, that sweated, that hoped, hands that have long since turned to dust. And yet their work remains, still standing, still guarding, still whispering across the centuries. We were here. We served. We remember. The emperor's vision was to rule forever, in life, in death, in memory. And though his flesh has vanished, his dream endures in silence. The silence beneath the hills, beneath the fields of Shaanxi, beneath the roots of the trees, beneath the hum of the living world, an empire sleeps in perfect formation, row after row of soldiers, horses, chariots, all turned toward the east, as if waiting for the dawn. Perhaps one day, when the earth opens again, Their emperor will rise once more, and his army will march into eternity. But for now, they remain where they have always been, still, patient, their clay faces unbroken by time. And so we begin our journey, back into the age of the first emperor, the man who dreamed of conquering death, and whose shadow still lingers beneath the hills of China. In the far west of ancient China, where mountains meet the mist and rivers carve deep valleys, lay the kingdom of Qin. It was a land of hard soil and harder men, a frontier realm, surrounded by enemies, forged by centuries of war. Here, in 259 BCE, a child was born under uncertain stars. His name was Ying Zheng. He would grow into the most powerful ruler the world had ever known. But in the beginning, he was only a prince, the son of a minor king in a fractured land. China, at that time, was not a single nation. It was 7 rival kingdoms, each ruled by its own kings, generals, and gods. They fought endlessly for dominance in what history would call the Warring States period, a century of ambition and blood. In those days, the state of Qin was seen as a barbaric land, a harsh and disciplined society at the edge of civilization. Its people were farmers and soldiers, their laws strict, their punishments severe, but that discipline would become their strength. While other kingdoms grew rich and complacent, Qin trained in silence, forging its destiny like a blade in the dark. Ying Zheng's early life was marked by intrigue. His father, King Xiang, had come to power through a tangle of alliances and betrayal. His mother, Lady Zhao, was once a concubine of a powerful merchant. In the eyes of the nobles, the young prince's blood was tainted. He was not expected to rule, and even less to survive. At 13, he inherited the throne of Qin, a boy surrounded by ministers who whispered in shadows, a court ruled by cunning, fear, and ambition. Every smile could hide a knife. Every ally could turn overnight. But the boy was watching, silent, calculating. He studied the movements of men as if they were pieces on a board. He learned to trust no one and to wait for the moment when he would hold all the power himself. As he grew, so did the state of Qin. Its armies became a force of iron and discipline. Its generals moved with precision, crushing rivals with a speed the world had never seen. Behind their victories was a philosophy, legalism. Legalism taught that people were weak, that only strict laws and absolute obedience could create true order, reward the loyal, punish the disobedient. No mercy, no emotion, just the law as cold and eternal as metal. This was the world Ying Zheng inherited, and it shaped him completely. He believed the chaos of the age could only end if the world had one ruler, one law, one destiny. To him, freedom meant disorder, difference meant rebellion. He saw himself as the axis around which all would turn, a living mandate of heaven. In his teenage years, he began to remove those who might oppose him. Advisors vanished quietly. Generals who questioned orders were replaced. Even his mother, once a figure of immense influence, was forced into silence after a scandal that nearly tore the court apart. The boy who had been doubted was now feared. By the time he turned 20, his eyes were set on the horizon, on the other 6 kingdoms that still dared to call themselves kings. He would bring them all to their knees, not through mercy, but through unity by force. He studied maps obsessively, lines of rivers, routes of trade, mountain passes. He understood that the empire was not only won by soldiers, but by logistics, by grain, by time. While others sought glory, he sought permanence. Yingzheng became a storm that moved eastward, consuming state after state. His generals, like Wang Jian and Meng Tian, carried his will like fire across the land. Every victory was not merely a conquest, but a step toward something greater, a single world bound under heaven. But behind his conquests, there was always something deeper, a shadow that followed him, the fear of death. He had seen too many kings die young, their bodies gone, their names forgotten. He understood that power meant nothing if it vanished with the flesh, and so, even in his youth, he dreamed of immortality, a world where he would never die, a world where his presence would echo forever. When he finally conquered the last of the rival kingdoms, he declared the birth of a new era. He took a title no one had ever used before, Shi Huangdi, the first August Emperor. The world had never seen such a ruler. He abolished the old titles of king and lord. He ordered that the written language be unified, the weights and measures standardized, the coins minted in the same shape across the land. From the deserts of the west to the shores of the eastern sea, all bowed to one name, his name. Yet, even as the empire flourished, the emperor felt the ticking of time in his heart. He knew that death was patient, waiting just beyond the horizon of his triumph. He had unified the living world, but he still feared the next one. And so, deep within the mountains near the capital of Xianyang, he began to plan a kingdom that would never fade, a city beneath the earth, built not for the living, but for eternity. In that city, he would continue his rule after death. He would walk beneath the stars of a painted sky, float upon rivers of mercury, and command an army that would never rest. The idea took root like a seed in his mind, a secret that would grow into one of the greatest wonders in all of human history. But before the clay soldiers could rise, before the torches of the craftsmen were lit, the emperor still had one task to complete, to make his empire immortal in the world of men. And so he built walls across the mountains, roads that stretched for thousands of miles, canals that cut through the plains. He sent expeditions to the seas to seek the herbs of everlasting life. And as he did, his obsession deepened. The world would one day crumble, but the emperor's tomb, his eternal home, would endure. In time, that vision would consume him. But from that fire, from that relentless will, the Terracotta Army would be born. The age of war was coming to its end, but it did not end quietly. It ended in fire and iron. Across the valleys and plains of ancient China, smoke curled from burning cities. The clash of bronze and steel echoed across the land. It was the sound of kingdoms dying and the birth of an empire that would outlast them all. Yingzheng, now in his 20s, stood at the heart of this storm. He no longer fought merely as a king seeking victory. He fought as a man who believed he was destiny itself. The state of Qin moved like a machine. Its armies were precise, tireless, trained in silence, drilled to perfection. Every man knew his place, his weapon, his command. They fought not for glory, but for order. The generals of Qin, Wang Jian, Wang Ben, Meng Tian, were masters of logistics as much as of battle. They built roads as they advanced, turning every conquest into a supply line for the next. While other kingdoms struggled with distance and famine, Qin soldiers marched on stone and discipline. The wars of unification began with Han, the smallest of the 7 kingdoms. It fell quickly, almost quietly. Then Zhao, stronger, proud, but already weakened by decades of war. Qin's armies encircled it, cutting off water, grain, and hope. Cities surrendered. Resistance was crushed. The survivors were absorbed. their soldiers conscripted, their lands remeasured. Next came Wei, then Yan in the cold north, and finally the great southern power of Chu. Each victory brought the same outcome: destruction, then order. Where the old flags burned, new roads appeared, new laws, new coins bearing the mark of Qin. To Yingzheng, this was not conquest. It was purification, a cleansing of chaos from the world. He believed he was restoring harmony, all under heaven, united beneath one rule, one law, one emperor. In the old kingdoms, philosophers had long debated how the world should be governed. Some spoke of virtue, others of compassion. But in Qin, there was only the law. The law and the emperor were one. As the armies moved east, the Qin rulers sent officials to follow them, measuring fields, dividing districts, erasing the boundaries of the past. The conquered kings were not slain in public. They were erased in silence. Their lineages ended, their histories rewritten. Even the names of their states would vanish, as if they had never existed at all. The emperor's unification was more than military. It was psychological. He understood that to rule a vast land, you must not only control the body of the people, but their memory. And so, in his empire, the past became what he said it was. Still, the wars were brutal. Tens of thousands died on both sides. Rivers ran red, fields turned to ash. But for the emperor, this suffering was necessary. Order demanded sacrifice. When the last kingdom, Qi, fell to his armies in 221 BCE, a new age began. The dream of centuries, the unification of China, was at last reality. That year, Yingzheng stood before his ministers. In the capital of Xianyang, he looked upon the map of his empire, a land stretching farther than any before him had ruled, and he spoke words that would echo for millennia. The world under heaven has long been divided. Now it shall be made one. He declared himself not simply a king, but Shi Huangdi, the first August emperor. He believed there would be others after him, a second, a third, a fourth, an unbroken line of rulers continuing his will for 10,000 generations. Under his rule, everything was to be standardized. The written script, the weight of a coin, the width of an axle. What a man measured in the east would match what was measured in the west. The emperor's order would be carved not only in law, but in the very tools of life. The roads that his armies had built for war now became the arteries of peace. Messengers could ride from one end of the empire to the other on a single system of highways. Bridges spanned rivers, fortresses rose along the frontiers, and laborers connected walls built by ancient kings into one continuous barrier, the first Great Wall of China. It was said that a traveler could walk for months and never leave the lands of Qin. But this unity came at a cost. The same laws that bound the empire together also crushed dissent. Books that questioned the emperor's authority were ordered burned. Scholars who resisted were buried alive. Knowledge itself became dangerous unless it served the emperor's vision. To his court, he was divine, a living bridge between heaven and earth. To the people, he was both savior and tyrant, a ruler who brought peace through fear and order through fire. The empire prospered, but the emperor found no rest. Power had not freed him from fear. It had deepened it. He feared the spirits of the kings he had destroyed. He feared the rebellion of men who still dreamed of freedom. And above all, he feared death. The wars had made him immortal in legend, but his body was still flesh. Each passing season reminded him that he could command armies, but not time. And so, While the empire above flourished, another empire began to take shape beneath the earth. In secret chambers, far from the noise of cities and courtiers, the first stones of his tomb were laid. Tunnels were carved, kilns built, plans drawn for an underground kingdom that would mirror the world above. He would not go to the afterlife as other men did, alone and helpless. He would go as an emperor, surrounded by an army that would never sleep, commanding in death as he had in life. But that dream of clay and immortality was still only a whisper in the darkness. Before it could take shape, the emperor would first turn his gaze toward the heavens and the question that haunted him most: how to live forever. When the wars of unification ended, the land fell into a rare and precious silence. For the first time in centuries, China was one. The fields that had burned now bore crops again. Merchants returned to the roads. Bridges crossed the rivers where armies once clashed, and travelers spoke a single language from the mountains of Shu to the shores of the eastern sea. But peace did not come easily. It was not born of forgiveness, but of control. The first emperor ruled with the same iron certainty that had carried him through war. To him, peace was simply another kind of discipline, a structure built not on love, but on obedience. He reorganized the empire completely. Gone were the old kingdoms, their borders erased. In their place rose 36 commanderies, each governed by officials appointed directly by the throne. No more hereditary lords, no more rival kings. All power flowed downward from the emperor alone. Every document, every decree, every law carried the weight of his seal. The empire became a vast machine, each cog moving in rhythm to one mind, his. To unify thought itself, he ordered the writing system standardized. The thousands of characters, once written differently in each region, were now made uniform. What one scribe wrote in the north, another could read in the south. Weights, measures, currency, all were made the same. An inch in one province was an inch everywhere. The width of cart axles was fixed so that every road, every rut, fit perfectly across the empire. It was a vision of perfect harmony, a dream of a world that could be measured and ruled. And in many ways, it worked. Trade flourished, taxation became predictable, messages moved with unprecedented speed. The empire breathed as one body, its veins pulsing with order. But beneath this harmony, fear lingered. The emperor's control reached into every household. Spies reported whispers, officials watched for disloyalty, and punishment came without hesitation. His philosophy was clear: let the people fear the law, and they will never defy it. His ministers praised him as divine, the Son of Heaven, chosen to bring balance to a chaotic world. But some scholars saw danger in this perfection. They feared a world too tightly bound, where the hearts of men were chained to the will of one. One day, a group of Confucian scholars petitioned the throne, pleading for mercy and moral virtue to temper the rule of law. The emperor listened, and then ordered their books burned. The knowledge of centuries, philosophy, poetry, history, was turned to ash. He declared that all truth would come from the emperor alone. The past was no longer a teacher, it was an enemy. And so, the great burning of the books began. Scrolls vanished. Libraries emptied. Some who resisted were executed, others exiled to the edges of the empire. The air filled with the smoke of forgotten words. To the emperor, this was not cruelty. It was clarity, a world with one voice, one truth, one emperor. Yet, in private moments, he was haunted. He who had conquered all men still could not conquer time. Every night he would summon alchemists and priests. To speak of immortality, they brought him elixirs, powders, and metals, said to grant eternal life. He drank mercury and gold, believing they would preserve his soul. Ironically, those same potions would one day hasten his death. Still, he pressed onward. He sent ships eastward to find the mythical islands of immortals, the Isles of Penglai, where sages were said to live forever, drinking the dew of heaven. Hundreds sailed away under his command. None returned, and while he searched for life beyond life, he built monuments to permanence. Across the empire, workers carved mountains into fortresses, bridged rivers with stone, and connected the northern walls into one colossal barrier, a wall that would stretch like a spine across the earth. The Great Wall was both shield and symbol, a mark of separation between order and chaos, between the empire and the unknown. Thousands died building it. Their bones, it was said, were buried within the wall itself. The emperor rarely appeared in public. He traveled in secrecy, in vast caravans of identical carriages, so that no assassin could know which one held him. He feared betrayal, poison, the judgment of the gods, and yet he still believed he had been chosen. He had brought unity, peace, and greatness. He had made the world whole again. In his palaces, he surrounded himself with beauty, jade, gold, silk, and music so soft it could lull an army to sleep. But even in luxury, he found no peace. He ordered the construction of secret tunnels beneath the capital so that he could move unseen from palace to palace. He grew suspicious of his own ministers. He trusted no one fully, except the vision that had guided him all his life to rule forever. That vision turned inward into obsession. He began to dream of the afterlife as an empire of its own, a place where he would need the same order, the same soldiers, the same laws. If his rule was to continue after death, then his tomb must be a reflection of his empire, a perfect mirror beneath the earth. And so, in a valley near the mountains of Lishan, construction began on what would become the most extraordinary burial site in history. Tunnels were carved deep into the soil. Chambers expanded like the veins of a living heart. Thousands of workers disappeared into the earth, never to return. The emperor's dream of eternity had taken physical form, and the world above would have no idea what slept beneath its feet. The empire was at peace, the people silent, the emperor triumphant. But somewhere deep beneath the capital, in the flicker of torchlight, the first clay soldiers were being shaped. One by one, the guardians of eternity. The first emperor had conquered everything that could be seen. Every mountain, every river, every kingdom under heaven now bowed before him. But the one enemy he could not see, the one foe that waited quietly for all men, was death. It haunted him. In the quiet of his palace, amid golden pillars and silk curtains, he felt its breath. He could not name it aloud, but he felt it in the tremor of his pulse, in the ache of his bones, in the knowledge that even an emperor could not command time. In those sleepless nights, he called for his scholars, his priests, his alchemists. They came bearing scrolls and legends, tales of mountains that touched the sky, of islands beyond the sea, where immortal beings lived forever. They spoke of sacred herbs that grew only under moonlight, of elixirs that could make the body whole and imperishable. The emperor listened, and he believed. He ordered expeditions across his vast empire. Messengers rode east and west, north and south, seeking the secrets of life without end. Mountains were searched, rivers drained, forests combed for rare plants and stones that might contain the breath of eternity. His court alchemists began their work. They mixed gold, jade dust, and mercury, a substance believed to hold the essence of the cosmos. They promised the emperor that by drinking it, his spirit would never decay. He believed them, not knowing that the poison of mercury was already slowly seeping into his veins. At night, the fires of the furnaces burned bright, casting strange shadows on the walls of the palace. The smell of metal and herbs filled the air. The emperor would watch in silence as his alchemists worked, their faces pale and anxious under the weight of divine expectation. He would hold the cup in both hands, its liquid shimmering like molten silver, and then he would drink, believing, with every swallow, that he was one step closer to eternity. But as months turned into years, the emperor's restlessness only deepened. He began to see signs in every movement of the stars, every dream, every whisper of wind. If life could be extended through wisdom, then perhaps he could find the place where immortality was born. He called upon the scholars of the Tao, those who believed that the universe was a balance of forces, yin and yang, darkness and light, life and death intertwined. They told him that immortality was not about escaping death, but becoming one with the eternal flow of the cosmos. But the emperor wanted no philosophy. He wanted results. He wanted his heart to beat forever, his voice to echo beyond the grave. And so he demanded that the Taoist masters turn belief into substance. Legends speak of a great expedition led by a man named Xu Fu. The emperor sent him eastward across the sea, commanding him to find the fabled Isles of the Immortals, a paradise said to lie beyond the horizon. Xu Fu took with him 3,000 young men and women, craftsmen, and seeds of every kind to offer as tribute to the gods. They sailed into the mists of the Pacific and never returned. Some say they reached the islands and found paradise. Others say they settled in distant lands, founding new kingdoms in the name of the emperor. But in the chronicles of China, their ships were swallowed by the sea and silence returned. The emperor refused to accept it. He grew angry at the heavens, furious at the gods who denied him. If he could not find eternity in the world above, he would build it himself below the earth. And so his mind turned toward his tomb, not as a place of death, but as the beginning of a second reign. He envisioned an underground empire, a mirror of the world he had created. There he would live again, commanding an army of spirit and clay. The planning began in secret. His engineers, architects, and artisans were ordered to begin work near Mount Li, a mountain said to be sacred, its slopes steep and its soil red as blood. There, they would carve chambers deep into the earth and build the emperor's palace for eternity. No expense was spared. The wealth of the empire flowed into the mountain. Gold and jade were brought from every province, timbers from distant forests, bronze from the farthest mines. An army of laborers, convicts, and craftsmen descended into the valley. Their hammers echoed day and night. Their torches burned like stars in the darkness. It is said that the emperor visited the site himself, dressed not in royal robes, but in plain garments, to walk unseen among the workers. He would run his hand along the walls, feel the cool stone, and imagine his own presence there, eternal, unaging, unforgotten. His tomb would not be like others. It would be a kingdom beneath the soil, a place where rivers would flow with mercury, where the ceiling would be painted with constellations, and where every chamber would reflect the empire above. But even the greatest ruler cannot command the heavens forever. The more he sought to escape death, The closer it drew to him, he began to grow ill, his mind restless, his body weakening. The very elixirs meant to preserve his life had begun to consume it. Still, he pressed onward. He ordered new expeditions, new formulas, new dreams. He believed that somewhere, hidden in the folds of the world, there was a key to eternity, and if no one could find it, he would build it himself. His ministers grew fearful. They saw the emperor's obsession consuming his reason, but none dared speak against him. Those who questioned his divine mission were removed in silence, their names erased from record. In the capital, rumors spread among the servants that the emperor had already begun to change, that his eyes glowed in the dark, that his breath shimmered like smoke, that he no longer belonged entirely to this world. In truth, it was the mercury. Its poison was claiming him slowly, but to his followers, it was proof of transformation, a sign that he was transcending flesh. And so he continued to drink, to plan, to dream. He spoke often of the moment he would rise again in his underground palace, his terracotta soldiers awakening to serve him once more. In the end, the first emperor's pursuit of immortality did grant him a form of it, though not as he imagined. He did not live forever, but his legacy did. His empire would collapse within years of his death, but beneath the earth, his hidden kingdom would endure for millennia, waiting patiently to be found again. For even if flesh cannot outlast time, the human will can shape eternity in clay, in stone, and in the unbroken silence of the tomb. Near the foothills of Mount Li, where the land folds into quiet valleys, and the air smells faintly of iron and dust, the greatest construction project in human history began. It started in silence. No proclamations, no public ceremonies, only the quiet movement of workers, marching under moonlight, their torches flickering in the mist. The emperor's tomb was to be no ordinary burial. It would be an empire beneath the earth, a reflection of the world above, an eternal palace for a ruler who refused to die. Historical texts tell us that work began shortly after the emperor ascended the throne. Decades before his death, his vision had already taken shape. He knew that such a monument could not be built in a lifetime, unless begun early, and so, even as he conquered the living world, he was already building his next one. Over 700,000 laborers were said to be conscripted: soldiers, craftsmen, peasants, and prisoners. They came from every corner of the empire, marching in endless lines toward Mount Li. Some came willingly, hoping to earn favor. Most came in chains. They dug into the soil, cut through rock, and built vast chambers that stretched for miles beneath the surface. The sound of hammer and chisel became the heartbeat of the mountain. It was said that, at night, the glow of their fires could be seen for leagues across the plain. Deep beneath the ground, the emperor's new kingdom began to take shape. Engineers carved tunnels wide enough to ride chariots through. Massive halls were supported by timber beams and stone pillars. They designed stairways that descended into darkness, corridors that twisted like veins through the mountain's heart. The layout of the tomb was a mirror of the empire itself, a miniature world. At its center lay the burial chamber, the emperor's palace in death. Surrounding it were courtyards, armories, and outer chambers meant to house treasures, servants, and the spirits of his empire. Each section had a purpose, each hallway an order. Nothing was left to chance. Above ground, the work was endless. Oxen hauled stone, kilns burned day and night, and artisans shaped clay, bronze, and gold. The valley echoed with the rhythm of creation and of suffering. The emperor demanded secrecy. Every detail of the tomb's design was known only to those who built it, and most would never live to tell what they had seen. Some chronicles say that when a section was completed, its workers were sealed inside, buried alive with their work, so that no word could escape. Whether this is truth or legend, the fear it inspired was real. The emperor's architects drew plans for rivers of flowing mercury to represent China's great waterways, the Yellow River and the Yangtze. They imagined the ceiling of his chamber, painted with stars, the constellations of heaven, so that the emperor would rule both earth and sky. The walls would be inlaid with precious stones, and the floor covered with bronze and gold. Light would come from lamps fueled by fish oil and pearls, shimmering eternally in the dark. In the outer chambers, an army was being formed, not of men, but of clay. Artisans molded soldiers one by one, their hands stained with red earth. Each figure was built from sections: legs, torso, arms, head, assembled and then refined by touch. The clay was smoothed, detailed, given armor, weapons, and lifelike expression. No two faces were the same. Each warrior carried an identity, a spark of humanity. Some looked stern, others calm, some young, others aged and wise. They were not just soldiers. They were individuals bound together by a single purpose: to protect their emperor in death. Their weapons were real, bronze swords and spears, polished until they gleamed like mirrors. Their chariots were crafted from wood and bronze, drawn by life-sized clay horses, whose muscles seemed ready to move at any moment. To the artisans, these statues were not mere art. They were vessels for spirits. Each figure, once completed, was treated as if alive, painted with bright colors, eyes outlined, lips touched with red. When they stood together in formation, it was said the air itself grew heavy with presence, as if thousands of silent souls filled the chamber. The scale of the project was staggering. Kilns blazed across the valley, their smoke darkening the horizon. Clay was hauled in carts, mixed with straw and water, shaped and dried, then fired until it rang like stone. Supervisors marked the finished warriors with small stamps, the symbols of their workshops. Those marks would remain hidden for 2,000 years, waiting for archaeologists to find them again. The tomb grew larger every year. It consumed the lives of men and the wealth of the empire, and still the emperor demanded more. He ordered that the tomb should contain not only his army, but musicians to play for him, officials to govern his eternal court, and models of palaces, rivers, and mountains. Everything that existed in the world above was to be recreated below, perfectly, endlessly. When rain fell, it was said the valley filled with red mud, as if the mountain itself were bleeding. The cries of the workers mixed with the thunder of distant storms. To some, the project was madness. To others, it was divine purpose, the will of heaven made clay. The emperor visited often in his final years. He would descend into the tunnels with torches, his eyes gleaming in the dark. He would stop before the ranks of soldiers and gaze at their faces. Perhaps he saw in them the reflection of his own army, the men who had conquered the world for him. Perhaps he saw something more, the illusion of eternity. In his mind, he had already transcended death. He had created a world that would last forever, a second empire immune to time. When the workers looked upon the vastness of what they had built, they could not comprehend its purpose. But to the emperor, it was clear. In this silent city beneath the earth, he would rise again after death, to rule the afterlife as he had ruled the living. The mountain itself became his throne. the earth his fortress, the tomb his final command. And when the last chamber was sealed, and the final torch extinguished, the valley returned to quiet. Only the sound of the wind through the grass remained. Above ground, the empire continued to move. Armies marched, roads stretched farther, the Great Wall climbed the northern hills. But below, a new world slept, a kingdom built not of stone and steel, but of faith and fear, waiting for the day when the emperor would join it. Soon, that day would come. Beneath the soil of Mount Li, the emperor's dream took form, not in flesh and blood, but in clay and fire. The artisans who worked in the hidden valley were no ordinary laborers. They were masters of a forgotten art, called upon to give shape to the emperor's vision of eternity. Their task was unlike any in history: to build an entire army that would never breathe, never sleep, and never fall. No one knows exactly how many men worked on them, but from the fragments unearthed centuries later, we can imagine the scene: kilns glowing through the night, clay stacked in piles taller than men, the steady rhythm of wooden hammers pressing the earth into molds, the crackle of fire as new soldiers were born from the heat. Each warrior began as a handful of earth. The clay was taken from the local low soil, fine, yellow, rich with minerals. It was mixed with water and straw until it reached the perfect balance between strength and softness. The sculptors shaped the figures in sections: legs first, then torso, then arms and hands, and finally the head. Molds were used for the basic body shapes, but the details, the faces, the hair, the expressions, were all crafted by hand. No two are the same. Even among the thousands that stand today, not a single warrior repeats another's features. Some have broad jaws and thick eyebrows. Others carry slender faces, calm and refined. Some smile faintly, others glare with quiet focus. There are old soldiers, young archers, stern officers, and wise generals. Each face seems to belong to someone real. Perhaps they were modeled after actual soldiers, men who served in the emperor's armies, immortalized in clay. Or perhaps the artists, forbidden to sign their names, left their own likenesses hidden in the ranks. A secret act of memory, a whisper of rebellion. Whatever the truth, the individuality of each figure is astonishing. They stand as both an army and a collection of portraits, a gallery of souls that blurs the line between art and life. The soldiers vary in height according to their rank. The lowest infantrymen stand just under 1.8 meters tall. Officers are taller. Generals tower over all, reaching 2 meters or more. Each figure was originally painted in brilliant color: reds, greens, blues, purples, and gold. When new, the army must have shimmered like a living tapestry. Today, we see them in shades of gray and brown, their colors lost to time. But in the moment of their creation, they were vibrant, radiant, alive. Modern analysis shows that pigments used on the statues were rare and precious: azurite for blue, malachite for green, cinnabar for red. When the figures were unearthed in the 1,970 seconds, the colors vanished within minutes of exposure to air, cracking and curling away like old paint touched by flame. In those brief moments, archaeologists glimpsed what the emperor's army once looked like: a spectacle of light beneath the ground. Each warrior was given armor appropriate to his rank. Infantry wore scale plates, charioteers heavy chest guards, archers lighter gear for movement. Their hairstyles and headgear also reflected status: knots on the right for soldiers, on the left for officers, top knots for generals. Some wore helmets, others cloth caps or metal headbands. Their posture was precise. Rows of standing soldiers faced forward, hands outstretched as if holding spears or halberds now long decayed. Kneeling archers balanced on one knee, eyes focused ahead, ready to release a string that no longer exists. Behind them, chariots were drawn by horses, life-sized, muscular, and alert. Their nostrils flare, their ears twist forward, their bodies tense as though waiting for the signal to charge. These horses were sculpted with the same care as their riders. They were cast from molds and refined by hand, their manes carved strand by strand. Bronze bits and reins once adorned their mouths, and each chariot was fitted with wooden shafts and bronze wheels. Time has taken the wood, but the clay remains unyielding and patient. The weapons of this army were not symbolic, they were real. Archaeologists have uncovered thousands of bronze swords, spears, daggers, and arrowheads, many still sharp, their metal protected by a thin coating of chromium oxide. This accidental discovery of a chemical process has astonished scientists, for it kept the blades untarnished for over 2 millennia. Each weapon was functional, balanced, and deadly. It was as if the emperor truly believed that in the next world, his battles would continue. The soldiers were arranged in military formation, mirroring the strategies of Qin warfare. In the front lines stood the archers, both kneeling and standing, ready to unleash the first volley. Behind them came the spearmen, then the charioteers, and finally the commanding officers. Even underground, discipline endured. From above, it would have looked like an army frozen in the instant before battle, a moment stretched across eternity. Each pit was organized like a living battlefield. Pit 1, the largest, contained the main force over 6,000 warriors. Pit 2 held cavalry and archers. Pit 3 was smaller and served as the command post. Together, they formed the structure of a complete army, an empire in miniature. The level of craftsmanship is almost impossible to imagine. The sculptors who worked on the figures belonged to different workshops, each specializing in a certain part: heads, hands, armor, or horses. Every piece was signed or stamped with a mark identifying its maker or workshop. These stamps were both a signature and a guarantee of quality. A failed piece could mean punishment, a perfect one survival. To assemble the warriors, artisans joined the baked sections with slip, a thin clay paste that fused when refired. After cooling, the surface was polished smooth and painted in multiple layers. Then came the final detail, the eyes. Carefully, delicately, they painted pupils and lashes, and with that final touch, the warrior was given life. In the flicker of torchlight, hundreds of completed soldiers stood ready, their eyes reflecting the glow of the flames. Imagine the silence, a vast chamber filled with faces staring forward, as if waiting for orders that would never come. The artisans must have felt the weight of what they created. They were shaping not only clay, but immortality itself. Their emperor demanded perfection, and in their hands, perfection became fear. Somewhere in those long nights, among the hiss of steam and the crack of fire, they may have wondered if their own souls were being sealed within the statues they made, because when the tomb was finished, many of them would never leave. The army was complete. Thousands of soldiers stood ready in their underground ranks, each in the place assigned by unseen generals. The air grew still, the torches were extinguished, and in the suffocating dark, an eternal silence fell. The clay had become more than clay. It had become memory, obedience, and faith. the embodiment of one man's impossible dream. When we look at the Terracotta Army today, we see art, but to the men who made it, it was something else. It was an act of worship, a way to touch eternity through their hands. Each line, each curve, each delicate feature was a prayer in clay. 2,000 years later, their work still stands. The paint is gone, the weapons rusted, but the faces remain, calm, patient, unbroken. They have survived the rise and fall of empires, the passing of dynasties, the silence of centuries. They have outlived their emperor, their makers, and every dream that gave them birth. And in their stillness, they remind us of something deeply human, that even in our fear of death, we create beauty to defy it, that even in the service of tyranny, the hands of artists can leave behind a trace of eternity. The terracotta warriors were meant to guard one man's soul, but in the end, they became guardians of all human memory, a silent army watching over time itself. Beneath the slopes of Mount Lee, deep under layers of ancient soil and silent stone, lies a chamber that no human eyes have seen in over 2,000 years. It is the resting place of the first emperor, the heart of his underground empire, the palace of eternity. From the surface, the site appears as a simple mound, a broad hill rising from the plain, covered in grass and trees, quiet and unassuming. But beneath that calm exterior spreads a labyrinth of tunnels, vaults, and corridors, a world carved by human hands in service of one man's dream. The ancient historian Sima Qian, writing nearly a century after the emperor's death, described the tomb in haunting detail. He wrote that the emperor's burial chamber was designed as a map of the empire itself, a miniature cosmos contained within the earth. The ceiling was said to be studded with pearls and gems, forming constellations that mirrored the night sky. The ground was shaped into mountains and valleys, and rivers of mercury flowed through them, representing the great waterways of China, the Yangtze, the Yellow River, and the seas that bordered the empire. He wrote of mechanical crossbows hidden within the walls, ready to fire upon any intruder, of doors sealed with bronze, so tight that no sound, no scent, no breath could escape from within, and of a chamber filled with treasures, artifacts of jade and gold, scrolls of wisdom, and symbols of power meant to accompany the emperor into eternity. No one knows how much of this account is true. No one has opened the tomb to find out. Modern scientists have probed the site with radar and magnetometry. They have detected chambers, walls, and layers of unknown material. Soil samples taken near the mound contain unusually high levels of mercury, far higher than could occur naturally. It seems the ancient story was not a myth after all. Even now, the main burial chamber remains sealed, not out of neglect, but out of caution. The techniques to preserve what lies within do not yet exist. To open it prematurely would mean to destroy it. When the terracotta warriors were first unearthed, the paint on their surfaces vanished within minutes, crumbling as the air touched it. Imagine what would happen to the delicate wonders inside the tomb, to silk, lacquer, parchment, or color that has been protected by darkness for 20 centuries. And so the mountain sleeps on, its secret intact. To stand near it today is a strange experience. The air feels still, as if the world itself were holding its breath. The birds fall silent. The soil seems to hum faintly beneath your feet, alive with the weight of time. No one knows exactly what lies beneath that hill, but imagination paints the picture. At the very center, a vast bronze coffin. Around it, rows of vessels filled with rare metals, fragrant oils, and grains from the fields of every province. The ceiling above a universe of pearls, the rivers below glistening with liquid silver. Some say the mercury still moves, flowing slowly through channels as it once did, a mirror of the stars in motion. In the outer chambers, perhaps musicians stand frozen in eternal performance, their instruments carved from wood and jade. Court officials may bow in endless service, scribes bent over clay tablets, guards standing vigilant in silence. It is a world built not for the living, but for the dream of never dying. And yet, for all its splendor, the tomb is also a monument to fear. It was fear that drove its creation. Fear of death, fear of the unknown, fear of the end of power. The emperor believed that by recreating his empire underground, he could continue to rule in the next world, just as he had ruled this one. He imagined that when his spirit awoke after death, he would open his eyes to a familiar sight, his palace, his court, his soldiers waiting in perfect formation. Perhaps he imagined walking through those halls again, his footsteps echoing across the polished floors, his voice commanding the silent legions. Perhaps he believed that the line between life and death was nothing more than a door he could choose to open. The tomb was sealed after his burial. The entrances were closed, the tunnels collapsed, and the mound was raised above it. According to legend, those who built the final chambers were locked inside to ensure silence forever. The mountain became their grave as well. Over the centuries that followed, dynasties rose and fell. Wars raged across the plains, and still the tomb remained untouched. Earthquakes shook the land, rivers shifted, but the emperor's resting place endured. In time, the knowledge of its location faded into myth. Farmers plowed fields above it, children played on its slopes, and no one guessed that beneath their feet lay a world more vast than any palace above. It is humbling to think that such a masterpiece, such a vast act of human ambition, could sleep unnoticed for 2,000 years. But perhaps that is the nature of time. It covers all things with silence until the earth itself decides to remember. When scientists and historians speak of opening the tomb, they speak with reverence and fear. To disturb the emperor's rest is not a decision to be made lightly. There are those who believe that the tomb should remain sealed forever, a message from the past left untouched. Others dream of uncovering it to reveal its art, its science, its mysteries. But even they move carefully, knowing that what lies below may be as fragile as smoke. And so the mountain endures, guarded by time itself. Beneath it, the emperor sleeps in his subterranean palace, surrounded by his clay legions, his treasures, and the mercury rivers that shimmer in darkness. Above him, life continues. Cities rise and fall, children laugh in the fields. The wind moves through the grass, whispering softly across the mound, a lullaby for a ruler who could not bear to die. He wanted a kingdom that would last forever, and in a way, he achieved it. For even now, his name is spoken, his face remembered, his army standing guard beneath the hills of Qin Shi. The first emperor's palace beneath the mountain remains one of the last great secrets of our world, a silent universe suspended in darkness, where eternity still breathes, waiting for the light. The year was 210 BCE. The emperor of all under heaven was growing weaker. His once iron will, his commanding voice, his endless energy, all were fading. The man who had unified the world was now captive in his own body. The alchemists still came to him, whispering promises of eternal life. They mixed new elixirs, new metals, new poisons, disguised as hope, and he drank them all. His caravans roamed the empire in secret, each journey longer than the last, each one meant to find the path to immortality. He no longer trusted his ministers, no longer believed in the loyalty of men. He trusted only the dream that death could be delayed, defeated, or deceived. On his final journey to the eastern provinces, the emperor's health broke. Far from the capital, his body failed him. He died quietly in his traveling carriage, the air thick with incense and the scent of mercury. His attendants were terrified. The death of the first emperor could not be announced. They feared revolt, chaos, and the shattering of the order he had built. So, they hid the truth. They sealed the carriage, spoke of him as if he still lived, and continued the journey home. To mask the smell of death, they filled the surrounding carts with salted fish. The caravan moved slowly across the empire, the emperor's body decaying in secret, as his servants whispered orders in his name. When they finally reached the capital, the deception could no longer hold. The emperor was gone. The man who had united the world was now a shadow. In his absence, his empire began to crumble. Power struggles erupted within days. His chief minister, Li Si, and the court eunuch, Zhao Gao, forged the emperor's final edict, naming the younger, weaker son as successor. The true heir, Prince Fusu, was ordered to take his own life, and with that act, the fate of the dynasty was sealed. The new emperor was young and uncertain. The ministers ruled in his name, using the machinery of fear the first emperor had built. But without his hand to guide it, that machine turned upon itself. The people, exhausted by years of labor and war, began to rise. Rebellions spread through the provinces like wildfire. Farmers threw down their tools and took up weapons. Soldiers deserted their posts. The Great Wall was left unfinished. The emperor's dream of order dissolved into chaos once more, and all the while, the tomb beneath Mount Li waited for its master. His body was brought there in silence, hidden from the world. The burial was conducted in utmost secrecy. No mourning bells rang, no banners flew, only the sound of footsteps and the slow chant of priests echoing through the tunnels. The emperor was placed within his bronze coffin, surrounded by treasures, scrolls, and the objects of his reign. The chamber was sealed with molten metal, the air trapped inside forever. When the last rites were spoken, the entrances were closed, the tunnels collapsed, and the valley fell silent. It is said that the workers who sealed the final doors were trapped inside, their torches flickering out one by one. They became part of the tomb, the final guardians of their emperor. Above ground, his empire burned. The rebellions grew. In less than 3 years, the dynasty of Qin was gone. The capital of Xianyang, the city of the first emperor, was set aflame. Palaces, archives, and temples, all reduced to ash. The records of his conquests, his decrees, his dreams, vanished into smoke. It was as if history itself tried to erase him. Legends say that during the chaos, rebels reached the emperor's tomb. They broke through the outer walls, looted the chambers above, and set fire to the wooden structures within. Flames roared through the tunnels, devouring everything that would burn. But the burial chamber, deep and sealed with bronze, remained untouched. The fire raged above, but below, the emperor slept on, unaware that his empire was gone. When the flames died, the mountain returned to silence. The ashes settled, the earth closed, and time began its long work of forgetting. The Qin Dynasty had lasted only 15 years. It was the briefest of empires, and yet its impact would shape China forever. The kings who came after denounced the first emperor as a tyrant, but they kept his laws, his measurements, his written language. They rebuilt upon his foundations. The China he created never truly vanished, but he himself, the man who dreamed of eternity, was lost to legend. Centuries passed, dynasties rose and fell. The mound of his tomb became just another hill on the vast plains of Shaanxi. Villages grew nearby, fields spread over the land, and the story of the underground palace became a myth whispered by old men at night. Some said that rivers of silver flowed beneath the hill. Others believed that the tomb was cursed, that those who disturbed it would never find peace. And so, for 2,000 years, no one touched it. The emperor who had sought immortality was forgotten by the living. But beneath the earth, his army stood waiting, their faces calm and unbroken, their formation perfect. They stood in darkness, their emperor long dead, their duty unfulfilled, and there they would remain as the centuries turned like slow wheels above them, through storm and drought, through kingdoms and revolutions, through silence and dust, until one day a farmer digging for water would strike a fragment of ancient clay, and the world would remember again. The fire that once consumed the empire had burned away its memory, but beneath the ashes, the Terracotta Army endured, proof that even in destruction, the dream of eternity can survive. It was the spring of 1974. The air over Shaanxi province was dry, filled with dust that shimmered in the sunlight. The Cultural Revolution was drawing to an uneasy close, and life in the countryside was beginning, slowly, to return to its rhythm. Near a small village outside the city of Xi'an, a group of farmers gathered in the fields. Their crops had suffered through a long drought. The wells nearby had gone dry. They decided to dig a new one. They brought with them simple tools, shovels, picks, wicker baskets to haul the soil. The ground was hard, the color of baked ochre. Each swing of the shovel rang like iron striking rock. As they dug deeper, one of the men struck something solid. He thought it was a stone, buried by centuries of rain and river silt. But when he brushed the dirt away, he saw not rock, but clay, smooth, shaped, human. He dug a little more, and a face appeared. Eyes, a nose, lips, the calm expression of a man staring into eternity. Startled, he called to the others. They crowded around the hole, staring at the ancient face emerging from the earth. At first, they thought it was a statue from a temple or perhaps a grave marker. No one imagined that they had uncovered the edge of one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in human history. They continued digging, and more fragments appeared. A shoulder, a torso, a broken hand still clutching a clay spear. The farmers gathered the pieces, stacking them carefully near the well. Someone suggested they inform the local authorities. Others hesitated. The past, in those days, was a dangerous thing to disturb. But word spread quickly. Within days, a small team from the local cultural bureau arrived. They examined the fragments, their hands trembling with excitement. What they saw was unmistakable, ancient craftsmanship of extraordinary precision. The team reported their findings to Xi'an. Soon, archaeologists from the Shaanxi Institute of Archaeology arrived, led by a man named Zhao Kangmin. When Zhao first saw the clay head, he was speechless. The detail, the scale, the realism, it was unlike anything he had ever seen. He began to excavate carefully, brushing away the soil layer by layer. And as the days passed, the earth revealed more than anyone could have imagined. A head, then another, then rows of them, faces staring upward through the centuries. Silent, waiting. The more they uncovered, the larger it became. What had begun as a single well expanded into a vast pit, stretching far beyond the edges of the field. Soon, the outlines of an entire army began to emerge. When the first complete warrior was lifted from the ground, Zhao and his team realized what they had found: the lost army of the first emperor of China. The news spread like wildfire. At first, no one believed it. The idea that thousands of life-sized clay soldiers could be buried beneath an ordinary field seemed impossible. But as the excavation continued, doubt gave way to awe. The figures were perfectly arranged in rows, standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces turned east. They were not broken relics. They were an army, still in formation, still guarding their emperor after 2,000 years. Each statue, when unearthed, seemed to breathe for a moment. The damp air clung to their painted surfaces, their colors vivid: reds, purples, blues. But within minutes of exposure, the colors faded, cracked, and vanished, leaving only the silent gray of fired clay. It was as if the life that had waited so long in the dark could not survive the light of day. The Chinese government soon declared the site a national treasure. Teams of experts from across the country were sent to Xi'an. Tents, laboratories, and scaffolding rose above the fields. The farmers watched as their quiet village became the center of the world's attention. They could not have known that their discovery would redefine history. By the end of 1974, archaeologists had identified 3 main pits. Pit 1, the largest, held over 6,000 warriors and horses in perfect military formation. Pit 2 contained cavalry and archers, and Pit 3, smaller, more secluded, was believed to be the command post, the nerve center of the underground army. Each pit was a world of its own. Broken pieces lay scattered everywhere: heads, torsos, limbs shattered by time and the weight of the earth. Reconstruction became a colossal puzzle. Each warrior had to be reassembled piece by piece, like a fragile memory reborn. For months, the archaeologists worked in silence, surrounded by faces from another age. They spoke softly, as if afraid to disturb the dead. And as the work continued, the world began to take notice. In 1978, news of the discovery reached the international press. Photographs of the warriors, their calm expressions and perfect symmetry, appeared on front pages across the globe. Scholars compared it to the tombs of the pharaohs, to Pompeii, to the great wonders of the ancient world. But this was different. This was not the past preserved by accident. It was the past built deliberately, as a message to eternity. The farmers who had unearthed the first fragments were honored by the state. One of them, Yang Jifa, would later sit by the entrance of the museum, signing souvenir books for visitors. A humble man who had, without knowing it, opened the door to another world. The site expanded rapidly. New pits were mapped, and evidence suggested that the complex was far larger than anyone had imagined. It was not just an army, it was an entire city beneath the ground. Kilns used to fire the statues were discovered nearby, their bricks still blackened with ancient soot. Fragments of armor, bronze chariots, and real weapons were unearthed beside the warriors. Each new find added to the wonder and to the mystery. How had such an immense project been accomplished? With the tools of the 3rd century BCE, how had the artisans managed to create thousands of unique faces, each so lifelike, so human? And how had this vast creation remained hidden for more than 2,000 years? The answers were not simple. Even today, the full extent of the mausoleum complex is unknown. What has been excavated is only a small part of it, perhaps 1%. The rest remains sealed beneath the earth, protected by the same silence that guarded it for millennia. In 1987, the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor and its Terracotta Army were declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The discovery became a symbol not just of China's past, but of the human ability to dream beyond life itself. Visitors from around the world now stand before the ranks of soldiers, staring into their ancient eyes. Some feel awe, others sorrow, but all feel the weight of time pressing down. What began with a few farmers digging a well became a bridge between the living and the dead, between the modern world and the ancient. It is a reminder that history never truly disappears. It only waits, quietly, beneath the soil. Sometimes, all it takes to awaken the past is a single strike of a shovel and the courage to keep digging. When the first fragments of the Terracotta Army were unearthed in 1974, archaeologists realized immediately that this was no ordinary discovery. They stood at the threshold of an ancient world, frozen beneath the earth, waiting to be brought back to light. But with that realization came a dilemma. How do you awaken the past without destroying it? The warriors had waited in darkness for over 2,000 years. Their colors still clung to the clay. Their armor gleamed faintly in the damp air. But the moment they touched sunlight, the pigments curled and vanished, as if the figures exhaled one final breath and returned to dust. The archaeologists had found a wonder and a tragedy. They soon understood that every step forward required immense patience. Excavation was no longer a matter of digging. It became an act of preservation, a conversation with time itself. Work at the site began carefully. The first warriors were excavated by hand, the soil brushed away grain by grain, the fragments lifted with linen slings and wooden frames. Each piece was numbered, documented, photographed, and mapped before removal. The pits themselves were enormous. Pit 1 alone stretched over 200 meters long. The roofs of the underground chambers had collapsed long ago, burying many figures under tons of soil and rubble. The archaeologists had to clear the debris while preserving the fragile remains beneath. They constructed protective shelters above the pits, vast steel structures that now house the museum we see today. Under their curved roofs, the terracotta warriors stand once more, not in the light of the sun, but under the soft glow of lamps, watched by millions of visitors from around the world. But the excavation itself continues, quietly, patiently, in sections still untouched by time. Each new layer brings surprises. Some warriors are found intact, others shattered into hundreds of fragments. The process of restoration is slow, a meticulous puzzle that can take months or even years for a single statue. Archaeologists often begin with a mound of broken pieces. They clean each shard with delicate brushes, studying the curvature, the texture, the faint traces of paint and fingerprints left by the ancient sculptors. Then, one by one, they begin to fit the fragments together, like assembling the bones of a memory. A complete warrior can consist of more than 100 separate pieces. Once assembled, it is reinforced from within to ensure stability against moisture and time. Some figures have been restored from fragments no larger than a fingernail. This work is done not by machines, but by human hands. Steady, patient, reverent. Preservation of the colors became a challenge unlike any other. When scientists first saw the polychrome surfaces fade within minutes, they knew they were witnessing something irreversible. But rather than give up, they began to search for solutions. Through collaboration with experts from around the world, from Germany, Italy, Japan, and the United States. They developed new techniques to stabilize the pigments. Today, special chemical coatings are applied immediately upon exposure, allowing the color to survive for years instead of minutes. Still, the process remains imperfect. Most of the Terracotta Army remains buried for now, protected by the darkness that has preserved it for millennia. Technology has become the new ally of archaeology. Using ground-penetrating radar, scientists can map the chambers still hidden beneath the soil without disturbing them. Three-dimensional imaging captures every detail of the warriors' faces, armor, and posture. Laser scanners trace the curves of their bodies down to fractions of a millimeter. This digital resurrection allows researchers to study the army as never before. They can rotate a statue in virtual space, analyze tool marks, and even reconstruct lost pigments through spectral imaging. In laboratories near the site, teams of chemists and conservators examine the clay itself. They discovered that the warriors were made from fine local loess mixed with quartz and sand, a mixture carefully calibrated for strength and durability. Microscopic analysis revealed fingerprints pressed into the clay, the signatures of artisans long gone. Some fragments bear tiny carved marks, symbols identifying the workshop that made them. From these marks, archaeologists reconstructed the entire organization of the imperial factory system. Teams of artisans working in assembly lines, each responsible for specific parts: heads, hands, torsos, or armor. It was an industrial scale of production that anticipated modern manufacturing by 2,000 years. And yet, despite the system, every face remained unique. The emperor had demanded individuality within uniformity, a perfect paradox of control and creation. The weapons found with the warriors also astonished researchers. More than 4,000 bronze weapons were recovered. Swords, lances, spears, crossbow bolts, many still gleaming, their edges sharp enough to cut paper. Tests revealed trace amounts of chromium oxide on the surface, an element that prevented corrosion. For decades, this was thought to be an ancient form of metal plating, centuries ahead of its time. Later studies showed it may have been a natural byproduct of the bronze casting process, but the result was the same. The weapons remained pristine. Each sword, each spear, was balanced and functional, not mere decoration, but tools of war, ready to serve in eternity. The horses and chariots presented their own mysteries. Each clay horse was built hollow, its body formed from two halves joined at the center. Inside, artisans had placed small clay balls to prevent cracking during firing, a delicate touch that showed astonishing technical knowledge. The chariots, though mostly lost to decay, left behind bronze fittings and wheel rims that hinted at their original grandeur. Nearby, archaeologists discovered two full-size bronze chariots buried separately near the emperor's mound. Each one was crafted with exquisite precision, drawn by 4 bronze horses, their harnesses inlaid with gold and silver. The chariots were likely ceremonial, used to carry the emperor's spirit in the afterlife. Their detail is so fine that even the hinges and ornaments move as if alive. Every discovery deepened the mystery. The more scientists learned, the more questions arose. How had the emperor's engineers achieved such mastery? With the tools of their age? What knowledge was lost when his empire fell? And how much more still lies hidden beneath the earth? Today, less than a quarter of the known site has been excavated. The rest remains undisturbed, protected by layers of soil and time. The decision to leave it buried is one of respect, a recognition that our technology is not yet ready to meet what sleeps below. In the vast hangar of Pit 1, the atmosphere is both sacred and surreal. The rows of soldiers stretch into the distance, faces illuminated by soft light. Tourists whisper as they walk past the glass barriers, their voices hushed by awe. Some take photographs, but most simply stand, their eyes meeting those of men who never lived, and yet somehow never died. The archaeologists still work quietly in the corners, brushing dust from fragments, matching pieces of armor, restoring hands, torsos, and heads. Each discovery, no matter how small, is a bridge between worlds, the living and the dead, the known and the forgotten. Science continues to reveal new secrets. Infrared imaging has identified traces of organic materials, fibers from ancient fabrics, remnants of silk banners, and faint outlines of wooden structures that once surrounded the warriors. Archaeologists have also discovered statues of acrobats, dancers, and musicians, figures that once entertained the emperor in life and were recreated to amuse him in death. They remind us that this was not only a tomb of soldiers, but of an entire world. Step by step, layer by layer, the buried empire returns, not as it was, but as fragments, as memories shaped by science and care. And yet, even with all we have learned, the greatest mystery remains untouched: the sealed chamber beneath Mount Lee. It still waits in darkness, its secrets intact. Until the day when technology can protect its treasures, the Emperor will continue to sleep undisturbed, his silent army standing guard. Archaeology is often seen as a science of the past, but here it feels like a science of patience. Each brushstroke, each fragment, each decision to stop or continue is guided not by haste, but by reverence. The archaeologists working in Xi'an are not merely uncovering artifacts, they are listening to whispers of clay, to the language of time. In their hands, the past speaks again, not loudly, but softly, through the rustle of dust and the rhythm of brushes, through the quiet breath of discovery. And in that silence, you can almost hear the sound of thousands of soldiers standing once more, their armor gleaming in the half-light, waiting for the call of their emperor. Stand before them long enough, and you begin to feel it, a presence, a quiet pulse, as if the clay itself remembers. Row upon row, thousands of faces rise from the shadows, each one unique, each one carrying the weight of a forgotten story. They are soldiers, yes, but they are also something more. They are echoes of the men who made them and of the men they were meant to represent. When you look into their eyes, you do not see the emperor's power. You see the trace of humanity, soft, familiar, and eternal. Some faces are young, their features smooth, hopeful, proud. Others are lined and weary, as if time itself had touched them, even before they were buried. There are stern generals with thick brows, and quiet soldiers with the calm of acceptance. Each one stands as if caught mid-breath, alive in stillness. No two are alike. Modern technology has confirmed that each face was individually modeled. The artisans who sculpted them worked from basic molds for torsos and limbs, but the faces were born from imagination or from memory. Some scholars believe that these were portraits of real soldiers, men from the emperor's armies, immortalized in clay. Others think they were the creations of craftsmen, inspired by the people around them, friends, family, perhaps even themselves. Perhaps a sculptor shaped a nose, like that of his brother, or carved the lines of a smile. he once loved. Perhaps he gave his own eyes to a warrior so that some small part of him would live forever beneath the earth. There is a strange tenderness in this thought that within an empire built on fear, art became a quiet act of remembrance. On some figures, you can still see the faint impressions of fingerprints pressed into the clay. They belong to hands long turned to dust, the silent signatures of the artists. The prints are small, delicate, perhaps belonging to young apprentices, working under the watchful eyes of their masters. In the heat of the kilns, those prints hardened into time itself. When archaeologists found them, it was as if the hands of the past had reached out to touch the present. Other traces tell us even more. Tiny marks carved near the base of statues bear symbols and characters. The names of workshops, supervisors, and artisans. These stamps were both practical and personal, used to ensure accountability, but also to record who had made what. Through them, a whole system of ancient labor emerges, organized, efficient, yet deeply human. Teams of craftsmen work together in what must have been enormous workshops. Some shaped heads, others armor or hands. Painters added color, metalworkers forged weapons, and foremen inspected the results. Every figure was part of a cycle: creation, inspection, perfection. A failed piece could mean punishment. A flawless one could mean survival. And yet, even under such pressure, the artisans created beauty. They gave life to clay. Perhaps they believed they were building something sacred, that each statue was not merely an object, but a vessel for the soul of a warrior. In ancient Chinese belief, the afterlife mirrored the world of the living. To serve the emperor in death was an honor and a duty. But for the artists, the meaning may have been different. Their own lives were bound to the project. Some worked there for decades, from youth until their last breath. The tomb consumed generations. It became their world, their purpose, their prison. Imagine the workshops by torchlight, rows of half-finished figures, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and smoke, hammers tapping, brushes swaying, voices murmuring quietly in the dark. Outside, the empire expanded. Inside, the clay army grew. Somewhere among those workers were masters of impossible patience, men who knew their creations would never be seen by living eyes. They sculpted not for fame, but for eternity. One can almost feel their presence in the tiny imperfections of the statues. A slightly crooked smile, a thumbprint on a belt, a faint tilt of the head. Each detail whispers of the human hand. There are moments when archaeology becomes something more than science. When you stand among these silent soldiers, you realize that what you see is not just history, it is empathy made solid. These faces remind us that every monument, every empire is built by human hands. Hands that ache, hands that bleed, hands that dream. The terracotta warriors were made to glorify a single man, yet they preserve the individuality of countless others. The emperor is long gone, but the touch of his sculptors remains. In this way, they achieved their own kind of immortality. There are stories that some of the workers who completed the tomb were sealed inside when it was finished, their fate tied forever to their creation. If that is true, then their souls still rest there, watching over their clay brothers. Others might say that every warrior carries a fragment of those lives, a trace of the men and women who shaped them, and perhaps that is why the army feels alive even now. Look closely, and you may notice how the light catches each face differently, how some seem to look back at you, their gaze shifting as you move. There is a quiet intelligence in those eyes, a stillness that knows something we do not. They have seen time pass, unmoved and unbroken. They have watched centuries rise and fall, and now they stand again, under the gaze of millions of strangers, each one searching for meaning in their silence. The archaeologists who work among them speak of a peculiar feeling, as if the army itself were watching. Even in the artificial light of the museum, there is an energy, a calm awareness that fills the air. You do not feel fear there. You feel respect. You feel the presence of lives woven into the clay. Artisans, soldiers, prisoners, dreamers, their stories melted together into one unbroken silence. It is the most human silence imaginable. When the visitors leave and the lights are dimmed, the soldiers remain in formation, unchanged. The air settles. The earth cools around them once more. Perhaps, in that stillness, the clay remembers the touch of the hands that made it. Perhaps it remembers the breath of those who built it, the rhythm of their hearts, the warmth of their lives. Every statue is a story, every face a name we will never know, and yet, together, they speak more clearly than any record or chronicle ever could. They tell us that history is not written only by rulers, but by the nameless, the countless, the quiet. In the Terracotta Army, the emperor achieved his immortality, but so did the people he never meant to immortalize. Their hands shaped his dream, and in doing so, they shaped eternity. There are few discoveries in human history that change the way we see the past. Moments when silence breaks and time itself seems to breathe again. The uncovering of the Terracotta Army was one of those moments. What began as a farmer's well became a window into the mind of an emperor and into the hearts of those who served him. It connected two worlds, the living and the long dead, with a bridge made of clay. In the years that followed the discovery, the site near Xi'an transformed from a quiet field into a global landmark. Where once stood rows of crops, now stand vast pavilions of glass and steel. Within them, the soldiers keep their eternal vigil, bathed in soft light. Millions come to see them each year. They arrive from every corner of the world, pilgrims of curiosity, drawn by the faces that have endured beyond empires. They walk slowly between the viewing platforms, whispering, taking photographs, and staring into the eyes of the past. No matter who they are or where they come from, they all seem to fall silent in that place. The terracotta warriors do not speak, and yet they tell a story that everyone understands. A story of ambition, of art, of mortality, and of the strange, fragile beauty of human legacy. For China, the discovery was more than an archaeological triumph. It was a rediscovery of identity. After centuries of revolution, rebuilding, and cultural change, the Terracotta Army reconnected the nation with one of its most ancient roots. The first emperor, once remembered only as a tyrant, was seen again through a different lens, not as a myth, but as a man, flawed, brilliant, terrifying, and deeply human. In his fear of death, he created art that transcended life. In his obsession with power, he forged unity, and in his dream of immortality, he achieved a kind of eternity he never could have imagined. Today, the Terracotta Warriors are more than relics. They are ambassadors of time. They have traveled the world to London, Paris, New York, Tokyo, Sydney, and beyond. Wherever they go, crowds gather in reverent silence, faces illuminated by the same wonder that once filled the archaeologists' hearts in 1974. People stand before them as if meeting ghosts, and in a way, they are. not ghosts of individuals, but of civilization itself, a reminder that greatness and fragility always walk hand in hand. The warriors have inspired painters, sculptors, filmmakers, poets, and philosophers. They appear in novels and documentaries, in museum halls and digital recreations. They are symbols not only of ancient China, but of endurance, discipline, and human creativity without limit. To modern China, the Terracotta Army is both a treasure and a mirror. It reflects the complexity of its history, the brilliance of creation, and the darkness of control. It reminds the nation that even in its earliest days, its people were capable of extraordinary imagination. And yet, the warriors also speak to something universal, something beyond any border or dynasty. They speak of our shared human desire to leave something behind, to build, to create, to be remembered. Every civilization has sought immortality in its own way, through pyramids, temples, cathedrals, stories, and songs. The Terracotta Army is China's voice in that chorus, a song made of earth and silence. The site at Xi'an has become one of the great museums of the world. Archaeologists continue their work, painstakingly uncovering new figures, new fragments, new mysteries. Technology has advanced, but the patience remains the same. Each discovery is still a whisper from the past, and the question of the emperor's tomb, still sealed, still waiting, hangs in the air like a prayer. No one knows what lies within or when it will finally be revealed. There is a quiet poetry in that restraint, in the decision to let the dead rest a little longer. It is as if time itself has agreed to wait until we are ready. In the decades since the discovery, the Terracotta Warriors have come to represent not only the beginning of China's empire, but the endurance of humanity itself. They stand at the intersection of art and power, of devotion and fear, of beauty and mortality. Their silence teaches us something profound, that even the mightiest dreams end, but creation endures, that the human hand, capable of both destruction and art, is what truly shapes history. When visitors leave the museum at Xi'an, they often turn back for one last look. The soldiers stand motionless, their faces calm, their ranks stretching into the shadows. The light glints faintly off their armor, and for a moment, it is easy to believe that they are still alive. They do not move, but they watch. They remember. Perhaps that is what immortality truly is. Not the endless beating of a heart, but the endless remembering of it. Every statue is a vessel of memory, every fragment of clay, a heartbeat preserved in silence. And as long as someone stands before them, as long as a single gaze meets theirs, the emperor's dream continues, transformed, softened, made human again. The Terracotta Warriors remind us that history is not buried, it sleeps, and when it wakes, it does not return as stone or ruin, but as presence, alive, aware, eternal. The farmers of 1974 could not have known what they were uncovering. They only wanted water, but in searching for life, they found it, not in the ground, but in the past, and perhaps that is the truest legacy of all, that in our constant search for survival, for meaning, for connection, we sometimes uncover something far greater than ourselves. The Terracotta Army was meant to guard a single man forever. Instead, it guards us all, a reminder of what we are capable of, and of how even our deepest fears can give birth to beauty. The emperor's dream of immortality came true, but not as he intended. He is remembered not through his power, nor through his conquests, but through the art born from his fear of death. And so, as the wind moves over the fields of Shanxi, and the stars rise above Mount Li. His silent army stands watch. A chorus of clay faces turn toward eternity, their eyes open, their silence unbroken. They do not need words. They have already spoken, and the world will listen. For as long as it endures, night falls over the plains of Shaanxi. The air cools. The fields grow quiet. Only the faint whisper of wind moves across the land. Beneath the surface, beneath the layers of history and soil, the army of the first emperor still stands, as it has for more than 2,000 years. They do not breathe. They do not sleep. They simply endure. The world above them has changed beyond measure. Empires have risen and fallen. Languages have vanished. Even the stars, slowly, have shifted in the sky. And yet, in the darkness beneath Mount Li, time moves differently. There, the past is not gone. It is simply waiting. The terracotta warriors are more than relics. They are a conversation between centuries. Each face, each line of armor, is a sentence spoken by someone long forgotten and heard now by anyone who chooses to listen. When you stand before them, you can feel that conversation. It does not speak in words, but in silence. A silence that says, "We were here, we lived, we dreamed of forever." It is the same silence that fills old temples, that lingers in ruins, that hums faintly beneath all great works of human hands. A silence that is not empty, but full of presence, memory, and something that feels very much like love. The emperor built his tomb to defy death. He built it to keep the world at his command, even beyond the grave. But in the end, what survived was not his will, nor his fear, nor even his empire. What survived was the art born from it, the hands that shaped clay into faces, that gave stillness the illusion of life. The beauty created in obedience, and yet somehow in defiance. Perhaps that is how eternity works, not as the triumph of power, but as the quiet persistence of creation. The Terracotta Army does not glorify conquest. It glorifies existence itself. The strange, miraculous fact that we were here long enough to leave something behind. Each warrior is a fragment of humanity, suspended between dust and divinity. Their silence is not cold. It is peaceful. It invites reflection, the way the ocean invites the sky. When you imagine them now, standing in their ranks, row upon row beneath the mountain, try to see them not as soldiers, but as witnesses. Witnesses to time, to memory, to the endurance of human hands. In their stillness, you can almost hear the heartbeat of the world itself. Slow, steady, eternal. The emperor wanted to rule forever. He wanted to command death as he had commanded life. But eternity cannot be ruled. It can only be joined. And somewhere, beneath the hills of Shaanxi, in that vast underground palace, the emperor has joined it, not as a conqueror, but as part of the silence he once feared. Above him, his clay soldiers stand in formation, facing east toward the rising sun. Perhaps that is no accident. Perhaps even in death, they are waiting for dawn, because dawn always comes, even after the longest night. It comes quietly, softly, like memory returning to light. And when it does, the warriors remain unchanged. The first rays of morning touch the fields above them, but below, their stillness continues, endless, calm, and whole. The story of the Terracotta Army is not just the story of a man who tried to live forever. It is the story of all of us, of how we reach for meaning, of how we build and hope and remember. It is proof that even the deepest fear can create something beautiful, that even in the shadow of death, human beings shape life. When you think of them, those faces in the dark, remember that they were once made by hands no different from yours, hands that trembled, that worked, that dreamed, and though those hands have turned to dust, their touch remains. It lives on in the clay, in the art, in the silence that still fills the chambers of the earth. That silence is not the absence of life, it is the presence of eternity. Close your eyes, listen to it. The faint hum beneath the world, the sound of time breathing, the whisper of thousands of forgotten lives, folded into one endless moment. That is the true immortality, not the conquering of death, but the acceptance of it. The peace that comes when what we have made outlives what we were. The emperor sought to live forever, and though his body fell, his dream remains. It stands in ranks of clay, it gazes through the dust of centuries, it watches the world it once ruled with quiet, unbroken calm. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps eternity was never meant to be endless life, but endless memory. In the end, the silence beneath Mount Lee is not the silence of death. It is the silence of completion, the silence of something finished, perfect in its stillness. As night deepens, the air cools again. The land grows darker. Above, the stars shimmer over the fields of Shaanxi. Below, the emperor and his army sleep on. They do not know we watch them. They do not need to. Their purpose is fulfilled. They stand guard forever in the heart of the earth, not for power, not for fear, but because that is what they were made to do, to remember, to endure, to be. And so the story ends where it began, in silence, a silence that is not empty, but eternal. The silence beneath the hills,